Recording in progress, says the nice robot lady. Welcome to Shading and Lighting. And of course, my lights disappeared above me. Yay. Guess they went off the timer. Okay, so if the room suddenly goes dark, I will have to jump up and turn lights on. I guess it doesn't consider an instructor in the front to be worthy of lighting, but so ironic. Okay, so as I said, welcome to Shading and Lighting. We are offering a campus experience on Mondays and Wednesdays from 9 to 1. Those are our normal lecture times. If you can't make the campus lecture, make sure that you are on Zoom. If you're watching this and you missed it, you are expected to attend the live Zoom sessions unless there are some extenuating circumstances. We've got downloads for you guys in the first activity, which is lesson 1.1. And we will be using Arnold this month. So if anybody's taken the class previously, we are shifting away from RenderMan and we will be using Arnold. Now, the thing about Arnold is, let me get my annotation tool here. So we will need to have Maya 2020. And the current version is 2020.4, which is what I have. The Arnold workflow that we have is built on Maya 2020 because the new version of Arnold includes a denoise filter feature. It's called a post imager inside Arnold's render view, which is really a big, huge milestone. That was one of the things that was really kind of pushing us away from Arnold earlier. You know, not only that, but I mean, RenderMan is a great renderer. It does a really good job. We just decided to kind of move toward Arnold because it is integrated in Maya and it should be a lot easier as far as licensing and updating. You update Maya, you're generally going to get a version of Arnold that is compatible with it. And we'll go over all that in a little bit. All right, if anybody has any questions, please, hit the space bar, unmute yourself. Type in chat. I'm going to watch the chat. Hopefully everybody can see it all right. And we're just going to make the best out of this and see how it goes. All right, so my name is Tony Saxon. Welcome to Shading and Lighting. My email is tsaxon@fullsail.com. Full Sail also moved us to the edu emails, but if you send it to this email, it automatically goes to the right email. So it doesn't really matter. I prefer to use this just because this is what I've always used. But, if you click the email link inside FSO, it will take you to my edu. Don't worry about it. It all comes to the same place, my mail. All right, we will take a 1-hour break between lecture and lab. We'll be done. I'm not sure if there is a class in this room right after us, so we will be done at 1 o'clock, and then lab will most likely start at 2. I should have Discord hours this week, although just be aware that I have jury duty on tomorrow, Tuesday. So this is in question. I will not have office hours tomorrow as of now, but you can still go to our class Discord channel and get help there. Also, I highly advise you guys that you will make sure you get everything working in lab with Frank. So Darian said, what was the name of the denoiser again? It's built into Arnold, Darian. It's inside there already. They call it noise. Noise. Denoiser, noise. And we'll get into that when we get into talking about the renderer itself. Right now, we're going to go over some rules of the road, and we're going to get into some theory, a little bit of history, and then we'll get into talking about rendering, especially in ARM. All right, so tomorrow, Discord hours are always going to be on, I'm sorry, office hours are always going to be on Discord from 10 to 4. I usually take an hour for lunch. Like I said, tomorrow I am supposed to report to jury duty, so just go to Discord anyway. You can post a question if you have an issue. Should have office hours Thursday. Frank will be running a Zoom open lab for online and campus students. Now we can do a lot of troubleshooting in Discord. We can screen share. We can, you guys can post screenshots. We can do audio chat there. The only thing is if we get more than one person, it's really clunky. That's why we offer a Zoom lab. So it is a general optional open lab. A lot of you may have animation or Portfolio 2. Don't worry about it. Like I said, this is optional from 1 to 5 p.m. So again, anybody has any questions, type them in the chat. We have 11 lectures, 11 labs. I highly encourage you to make it a point to attend both. We're going to give you the information you need to do the project in lecture, and Frank and Ari will help you guys in lab actually implement that, because that's the time for you guys to work, to troubleshoot, to iron out, versioning problems, stuff isn't working as you expected, the normal Maya stuff that we have. All right, 1 second. We have somebody coming in. So where's your mask? Oh, you got your mask on. Good, thank you. Shading and lighting? Yeah, 111 meters. Yes, this is it. All right, so what you can do is sit anywhere you want to just keep 6 feet apart from all your other students in here. Yeah, that's a joke. All right, so we do have somebody who came. What's your name? Okay. Okay, good. Make sure before you leave, you see me so I can give you attendance credit for coming to campus. Thank you. Okay, good. All right, so right now, hang on, guys, online. So if you want to click on the Zoom link that I have, you can see the slides and you can see the rest of your classmates. This one I'm using as a second monitor, unfortunately, just because I don't have enough real estate. So let's wait for our friend to get started here. You should have power. Do you have a power outlet there? Okay, good. All right, so back to the course expectations. Let me do a quick screen share, or let me mirror my displays. All right, so yeah, that is a mess. So let's minimize this. Let's close that for now. We'll minimize this. There we go. Like I said, we're going to run into a few small issues here occasionally. All right. So if I lose you guys, I shouldn't lose you. There we go. Okay, I shouldn't lose anybody, but you never know. All right, so course expectations. 11 lectures, 11 labs. We have 7 lab assignments. They are your major projects. They are projects 1 through 7. And we have 5 discussions. The 5 discussions are topical, meaning that they deal with our main parts of shading and lighting. So our course is built into 4 main parts. Okay, the first is rendering. Rendering is key. You've got to be able to get something out to be able to show it to somebody. Then we deal with lighting. You have to light your stuff to make it look good. We deal with materials. That is basically, is it shiny? Is it dull? What's the color? Is it transparent? Is it metal? Is it glass? What gives it those properties? And number 4, of course, I had to write on that. Not a good choice. Let's go 4 over here. All right, and then texturing. That is it more than one color? Does it have a pattern to it, like fabric or carpet? Or is it wood? Is it concrete? Is it something that provides us with a visual cue or clue as to what the material is made of, in addition to the materials? So these 7 projects are each worth 10% of your overall grade. Topical discussions are each worth 4%. So please don't blow any of those off. Some credit is better than no credit. So attendance for, Zoom lectures, if you can't make it to campus, you're expected to attend the live virtual lectures and labs. You do know that lab is going to be virtual, right? At 1? Okay, good. Let me know when you're logged in, and then I can. Yeah, no problem. Okay. So lectures are going to begin on the hour. We're still ironing a few bugs out here. If you're late, your responsibility to watch the lecture archives. I record all the lectures. I break it into 2 halves. We're going to do 2 hours up until a point. We'll take a short 20-minute break. That gives me a chance to actually render out the first part of the lecture, upload it to our YouTube channel. I can get that done in 20 minutes, and then we can start fresh for the second round. Okay, so a couple of things for your daily checklist. Please check your messages, check your emails often. You should be looking at them at least twice a day, but to be honest, when you're working somewhere, you have your email running all the time, you have your message system running. Respond to messages and emails in a timely, professional manner. Don't send any emails with attachments to me, only because sometimes Full Sail's email system can quarantine anything with an attachment. So just put it in an FSO message instead. It's usually a lot safer, and I can be sure that I get it. All right, we are very technical, so please take notes. We have a lot of buttons and switches and sliders, so it's really crucial that take as many notes as you can, and preferably in your own hand. Get a notebook. If you're not taking notes, you should be sketching. I mean, you're all artists, so make sure that you have everything you need. Don't rely on your memory. Memories are faulty at best, and we always say, yeah, I'll remember that. And then, 500 other things go by and we forget. It's just human nature. I do it all the time too. So you got to take notes. Take responsibilities for any actions, mistakes. We can take care of problems as soon as they occur or as soon as possible. It makes it a lot easier if there's an issue with anything. So don't put it off, address it, we can get it fixed. If you have a problem with Maya, delivering your work, own it, see it through to completion. It's a lot of making sure that your stuff is delivered. Honestly, it's all about the network. Just make sure that when you deliver something, go back to the main dashboard for the class, then go back into the assignment, make sure your stuff uploaded. Can't tell you how many times, people will upload their stuff and actually forget to hit the submit button because they're so, burned out. They're so tired. Some of them will actually fall asleep after they do that, and then they forget. So ask for help. If you guys have tried to help yourself first, if you find yourself spinning your wheels after about 10 minutes, ask for help, especially if you're in lab, even if it's virtual, that's why we are there. If you're having issues and we're not in lab, go over to our Discord channel and, post your problem. You may find other students had the same issue. Somebody may have an answer up there. And this kind of leads us to understanding and empathy when dealing with other people, especially in a social environment like Discord. That is our professional. We're trying to treat that like a professional forum. So no people bashing, project bashing, school bashing will be allowed there. Okay, it's all about learning and helping each other, maintaining a professional environment. The one thing I can say about rendering is patience. Nothing happens as fast as we want it to. Okay, so I believe you are in the waiting room, right? Okay, Frenzy. There you go. You should be in a second. And there you are. Just need to enable your audio. And you're in business. Okay. So awesome. All right. Like I said, patience. Nothing happens as fast as we want it to. Learning is difficult. Anytime you're learning something new, stick with it. It can be frustrating, but the idea is, sometimes the path of most resistance can be the most rewarding. It's one of those things where if you've got, natural ability in something, you don't really appreciate it as much as somebody who has worked really hard to overcome all of the hurdles and issues associated with learning something new. It's practice, it's trial and error, it's frustration. But in the end, when you finally achieve it, it can be really rewarding. So have patience, stick with it, you can get it. We're here to help. If you have to send me an email, don't forget to use the student email subject heading. It's going to be our course, which is GRA 1161. Right here, the month, which is 2020-104. 00 is our section, which campus is always 00. And then any issues you're having. All right, so just to kind of go through everything, let's check in, see if anybody has any questions so far. So Angel, Brianna, Chanel, Clifton, Darian, Derek, Frenzy, Jacer, Joni, Kentavious, Marie, Spencer, any questions at all? Okay, Brianne is good. Thank you. Contavious is good. Jacer's good. Clifton's good. Derek's good. Frenzy's good. Thank you, Frenzy. You can also chime in right there too. Oh yeah, you don't have to be completely online. I mean, we're humans, so hey, I remember other humans. I saw them a while ago. All right, good. Okay. Thank you, everybody. If you're in class on campus, they say no food and drink, but you can have water as long as you keep it bottled and, make sure it doesn't spill. What they're really worried about is sugary drinks. If you spill it, it gets on the carpet, we get bugs, we get, angry housekeeping people. So, all right. Like I said, please ask questions. Feel that you can participate anytime during the lecture. If you type something in chat, I will get to it when I get a chance to break from my thought. A couple of reminders, please do not share files or work with anyone or use someone else's work as your own. Unfortunately, it does happen. It's unprofessional. It violates Full Sail's academic integrity and policy. And also, you're not going to learn anything. And it really can be a career killer. Use of profanity can be counted against you in a professionalism grade, not because I'm a prude, but because there is a thing called situational awareness. Situational awareness means there is a time and a place for, shall we say, colorful metaphors. It's not all the time, and you have to be able to read when it's appropriate. So please bring any issues with the class to me. If you're in lab, bring it with Frank or Ari. Just let's try and help everybody else and, try and have some fun. Repeating students, if you are repeating the class, you will need to do all new assignments because we are using Arnold this month. We are not using RenderMan, and everything's changed. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right, all the information, where is it? Well, if you take a look in FSO, in activity 1 here, let me try and move all this stuff out of the way. Okay, there we go. Not too bad. All right, so we've got a course overview. We've got our objectives. Is Maya 2019? Frenzy, no, you're going to need 2020 because the new version of Arnold that comes with Maya 2020 has some really great rendering features that we're going to use in a class. So good question. Glad you brought that up. Thank you. All right, so we got an overview. Like I said, we got some objectives. We're going to be using the Arnold renderer. And like I said earlier, the current version of Maya is 2020.4. The version that ships with 2020.4 of Arnold will work. The nice thing about Arnold is if you go into Arnold, in fact, let me launch Arnold, or let me launch Maya just real quick and show you guys. Actually, I have a slide for it, so it's a lot quicker if I do the slide. Here it is. So 2020 is the current version. The plugin, the current version is 4.2.11. Now, the nice thing about the new version of Maya and Arnold, if you go into About, under the Maya menu, if there is an update, it will show you need to update. It'll be in green. So you'll be able to click, get latest. Current version is installed. You're not going to see any button to update or anything. So that's one really good feature of it. Okay, so back here, we're looking at what we have in FSO. So we've got today a bunch of stuff for you. We'll get to in a little bit. But for the assignments, we've got reading. We've got some reference here for you guys. We've got links. There's our Discord link. There's our Zoom meeting link. Obviously, you're here, so that helps. Video links. We've got our YouTube channel right now. There's no content there, but we will solve that by at least the first half of lecture, which is good. Got a couple links here. One of them is for Disney's practical guide to path tracing, which Arnold is a path tracer. Just like V-Ray, just like RenderMan. The differences in path tracers is it one directional path tracer or multi, or at least two. RenderMan had the ability to be bidirectional. Arnold is a single directional path tracer, and I believe V-Ray is also. Now, it just different way of conquering the same problem. In theory, if you shoot rays out from two different points, they will converge together quicker than if you shoot it out from a camera and the camera tries to find a light. Software, we will be using, in addition to Substance Painter, we will be using Adobe After Effects, Adobe Photoshop, there we go, Adobe After Effects. Adobe Photoshop, which I do believe we had listed. And we will also be using Unreal Engine. .25.4. So I know most of you have had some experience in either 3DF or model creation using Unreal Engine. We're going to be using it to do some rendering. Show you guys how to do a little bit of a, not a sequence capture, but an actual render using Unreal's rendering engine. Same kind of thing they use for cinematics. Now, we've got a couple docs here for you guys. And Arnold rendering workflow doc right here. That is pretty much going to give you the ability to go through the different parts, kind of the workflow. So the links at the top of the page are linked inside the doc. So if you go Arnold Render View, it takes you right here. Render settings, it jumps down here. The nice thing about this is it should help you understand what's going on also. I do have some information in there. A lot of it I pulled from their help docs or from my experiences and try to put them in here. So it kind of makes sense, like, what does this control do? We have stuff like these different settings. What do they do? So we've got that ability to take a look at it. I tried to be short and to the point with it. It's really just meant to give you the ability to look at it and kind of go, okay, I forget this and I can click here. How do I render? Oh yeah, I can use that button to do my final render. Or how do I start an IPR session? Oh, start an IPR session. Well, got to be inside the render view, click on it there. All right, so we don't have any troubleshooting doc yet because this is our first month working with Arnold. We've got the requirements for the assignment. We've got the submission requirements, what exactly you're submitting, and also the downloads for you guys. So pretty much everything you need is in FSO. So like I said, we've got the O'Reilly books, we've got links to the Zoom session, to our archives, to our videos, to the activity itself. Sometimes there's instructions in there in FSO. And other times we've got, instructions. We've got a link embedded in there for an instruction that'll take you to one of our docs on our OneDrive. All right, so like I said, the lecture format, the first couple hours, we're going to be doing, some lectures. I might demo some stuff. We'll take a short break in between so we can render it out, kind of ease the burden on my computer. And then when we come back, we'll finish up, do some actual demos for the actual assignment itself. Assignment deadlines, our portal is set to close, at the end of the deadline. It's not going to remain open. If you do not think you can make the deadline, or the deadline is even passed because you missed it for whatever reason, okay, send us an email or a message inside the activity in the feedback section so that we can reset the date for you. If you send an email, list all the activities specifically you need an extension for. Please do not upload files into the feedback area. Some classes like that, we don't. We want FSO to show the activity as complete, which means that, you will not get an automatic 0 because we have it set up to auto 0. Now, another thing, please don't send us a Dropbox link, Google Drive, OneDrive link. Put it in an email. Don't do that at all. Okay. Ask for us to open the portal. We'll open it. If you have extenuating circumstances, your Wi-Fi went down, you lost power, you had an emergency, we can work with you. If it's just poor time management, then, there's going to be a 10-point deduction each day that the assignment is late. We can give you a 3-day maximum extension. Okay, so like I mentioned, software, Maya 2020. Like I said, current version 2020.4, Arnold plugin. We're going to be using Photoshop. We're going to be using Unreal and After Effects in Project 4. And Substance Painter will be used in our final Project 7. So make sure you have working copies. All the Adobe stuff you guys have access to as part of your Creative Cloud. Unreal, all you need to do is set up an account. Epic Games has, Unreal you can use up until you make a certain amount of money for free, even commercially. Once you make a certain amount of money, of course, they want some money for it. Because if you're making money, they need to make money. That's just how it works. All right, let's see. We got somebody waiting in there. All right, Darian's back. There we go. All right. Welcome back, Darian. If you guys get dropped, don't worry about it. I'll let you in as soon as I see that you are getting ready, or you pop up. Zoom will give me a notification. So don't worry about it. All right. So good thing to do, as I mentioned, is next time you run Maya, find out what version of Arnold you have. Make sure it's the latest version. Like I said, you will need 2020 for this class. Ha, armchairs. His chair arms are exactly the same height as his power button. Oh yeah, hazards of work. Okay, file management. We highly encourage you and plead with you to not have any spaces in your file name or the folder name anywhere in your file path. Use underscores to separate words. If you put a space, it is liable when you give it to somebody else, or even later on in the production pipeline, it's liable to cause an issue. Now, that's only because a lot of times computers look for a path to get things to use and to write things, to store information. Also, no special characters. This goes for any computer you're working on. Doesn't matter whether it's Linux or Windows or Mac. Special characters are the devil. You put a dot in front of a name on a Mac, it's going to hide the folder like it will on a PC. Special characters are usually reserved for coding. And they can cause your computer to do unwanted things. And in a file name, it will definitely cause issues. File may fail, the render may fail, Maya may quit out, it may corrupt your file. If you have any questions, please ask. But if you're having issues rendering, most of the time we're going to look at your file path to see if there are any spaces or any special characters anywhere. And we can do that in Maya because in Maya, at the top of the title bar, it will show you exactly the path that you've got everything set to. All right, another thing, you must always launch Maya first, set your project, and then open your scene file. Don't double click on your scenes. Please, for the love of all that's good, don't do that. It may be okay in some classes, but in ours, it is the kiss of death. Because we have certain files linked up to be used for lights. We've got dome light images. So if you double click on a scene file, Maya is not going to know where to go get that image to display it. Do not double click on a scene, or a scene file, I should say. Okay, always set your project, or launch Maya, set your project, open your scene. Also, don't place your Maya project folder into another folder with spaces or special characters. Again, that's liable to cause you issues. All right, now, I did mention that in Maya, let me launch Maya here. So in Maya, you can actually tell if you've set your project properly and you open the scene, the entire path. So let me wait for Maya to launch. Let me minimize this. We'll throw this down here for now. All right, so yes, I still have RenderMan installed, and there is Arnold. All right, so first thing you want to do when you start Maya up, set your project. All right, whatever project you're working on, today we're going to be working on lesson 1. And we're going to be working in Arnold. So project 1, the download we give you contains 3 folders. You are looking for the project folder, the Maya project folder to set your project to. Usually what I like to do is open it up to verify. Yep, that is a project folder. How do I know? Well, it's got all of these subfolders that Maya uses. It's got a scenes folder, right? That's where your scenes are. Images, that's where your renders are going to be written to. It's got source images. This is where it pulls images into the scene from outside of Maya, things that are not native to Maya. So I'm good with that. I'm just going to go back a level, click on it once, hit set, file open, choose Arnold Day Scene. Don't save, continue. If you get this error, don't worry about it. I've had V-Ray installed on my computer and it wrote V-Ray information into every single file that I have. If you get this error, just click OK. It should be fine. Now, at the top here, you can see it goes all the way back to my base. It goes to user, there's my account name, got it in my documents folder. I've got it in another folder, but I'm using underscores, lesson 1. There's the main folder that I downloaded from FSO. Here's my Maya project folder, my scenes folder. So you can see the entire path. These little slashes here are indications that this is a directory or a folder. So, or location, folder, 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 and well, actually folder here, and then scene file. So if you're having issues, just go up here, make sure there are no spaces, make sure there are no special characters, underscores and dashes are acceptable. So don't forget that. Underscores and dashes are good. So we got underscores right here. And where we have dashes at? Any dashes? Oh, it doesn't look like I have any dashes in this, but dashes are okay. Make some more room here. All right, and let me minimize Maya. Okay. So any questions so far? Frenzy, you good? Frenzy's good. How about Angel? So Brianna's good. Chanel's good. Thank you. Clifton, Darian. Clifton's good. Jacer's good. Derek's good. Kentavious, thank you. Spencer, how do we update our Maya from 2019 to 2020? You will have to go to the Autodesk website, log in with your account, and then go get software. Because I believe you're going to have to get a new license for it. Yes. Uh-huh. What's the other one? It won't hurt. We're not going. It won't hurt anything. We're not going to use those because we're not doing like substance material transfers. We're doing substance textures out of substance back into Maya. Well, it doesn't hurt to have substance. It's not going to hurt anything. Those plugins, if Autodesk offers the plugins, they're usually okay and they shouldn't interfere with anything. So that's good. I'm glad. Now, when you went to Autodesk website, did you had to go get new software, right? And get a new license. Right. You had to go get a student license. Right. So yeah, So that's what you'll have to do, Spencer. You'll have to go to Autodesk's website, go to the education area, log in with your account, and then I think it's Get Software, and you find your version of Maya and you want 2020, and it should download and you should get a license for it. Good question. All right. Excellent. All right. So submissions. You'll notice that our naming in FSO. Let me see if I can. Where is FSO? Right here. So down at the bottom, we've got this file naming where it says last name, first name, project one, SAL-C, year, month. All right, that's going to be 2021_04. That is what we are using for our projects. So just make sure you have that properly done. We have a grading script that we've written that will basically read your files and look for, errors in it. If everything's good, it'll just pass right on. All right, so we're kind of done with this rules of the road. So let's take a little breath here and talk about rendering. So now when we talk about rendering, we basically need three things to make something visible. This goes for the real world, and it also goes for CG, not just Maya, for anything. In order to make something visible, you have to have a camera or your eyes to record the event, right? What good is it if you can't see it or you can't verify it happened? Light. Light needs to hit a surface. If light does not hit anything, it does not reflect, it does not go to the camera, we can't see it. So everything we have is based on reflectivity. All of the things that we see in the real world and even in CG is a result of reflectivity. Now, as I mentioned, light has to hit something, a surface, geometry, anything, in order for it to bounce off of it and go somewhere else. That somewhere else is usually a camera or our eyes. Take away any one of those three, and you can't record an event. Right? You got a camera, you got geometry, you don't have any lights, blank scene. You don't have any geometry, you got a camera, you got a light, you got a blank scene. Okay, so you need to have it. Now, when we talk about rendering, let's talk about rendering in terms of fine art. So what is rendering? And for that, think fine art. Doesn't have to be, well, let's not make it CG. When we talk about a rendering, and you've heard the term before, what does it imply? Anybody? Take a guess. Yeah, go ahead, Frenzy. Being able to make the picture. Okay, so what does that mean, though? What do you mean when you say a picture? make a drawing, make it a flower. But what makes it a flower that we see? What is it that tells us that's a flower, that's a chair, that's an apple, that's a banana, that's an orange? Okay, how it looks. So the devil in the detail is, what does how it look mean? Because it could mean something different to other people. Does that make sense? So how it looks is determined by what? What in our real world tells us that that shape is round, that shape is square, that shape goes away from us, or that shape is sideways, or something's coming towards us? Okay, our minds, but what do our minds need? First off, we need some visual cues in order for us to be able to, okay, so Angel says color, lighting, volume. Okay, that's a good start. Color? Yeah, color is sort of, believe it or not, color is a byproduct of reflectivity. And in order to have reflectivity, we need to have some lighting. Volume implies, spatial relationships, one object in front of another. Is it flat? Does it look like it has dimension to it? So I like what you have there, and I like what you're saying, Frenzy. But the thing, let's nail it down. So let's grab lighting, because that's always a good thing to have. And what does lighting do to something? If you have light on an object, what do you get opposite of where the light is? So if you take your pencil, a tablet, or anything, right? I put it on the desk here, and I see light on one side, but then on the other side, I see something else. Shadows. Yes, very good. Brianna, Cantavius got it. So lighting, shadows. Okay, so we have light, we have shadow. There's our reflection, right? That tells us that we've got all three of our components for rendering, right? We've got our eyes, we've got light. Light hits an object and it creates a shadow, 180 degrees from where the light is. So the only other thing that we can say is, a lot of times we say, well, what is that surface made of? What is that object made of? That's the thing that gives us the visual cue to say, oh, that's wood, that's metal, that's plastic, that's shiny, that's rough, that's dull, that is blue, that's red, that's green. It's the light's reaction to a surface that tells us that. So really, rendering can be kind of distilled down into its essence as light and shadow and a reaction to a surface. That's really like the most essential parts of what we have in rendering. Now, a lot of times you hear the term rendering, and before the days of CG, if an architect were to, make a building, and what they would do generally is make a building, and they needed a visual representation for the client. Because, face it, you're plumping down, like $10 million for a building, a big office building. You want to make sure that it's what you want, that it looks like what you pay for. So you hire an artist, they will do a rendering. They'll show you how that building looks, how the lobby looks. daytime when the sun is streaming in through the windows and hits wood and it hits metal and it hits glass and it's all shiny and pretty. And that's really what rendering in fine art is about. Light and shadow and a reaction to a surface. We've got some examples here. 18th century artist Frederick Leighton. They were really obsessed with light and shadow on cloth. That really kind of, if you could describe shadow on cloth, you were pretty much a good artisan. But it doesn't always limit itself to drawing on paper or, sketchbook, canvas, cave wall, carving in granite or marble or stone, right? It can be anything. And here on the right side, we've got Samir Strati. He's an Albanian mosaic artist. He did the Da Vinci self-portrait using 500,000 nails. So each one of those nails gave him a different property. Their drywall, their roofing nails, their zinc, their copper, their brass, their black, their white, their gray, whatever, he needed to get the look is what he used. Now, each one of those nails could be equivalent to what for us in CG? So we mostly work on our computers, right? We've got a bunch of what that makes our computer display properly. What is the display on a computer built on? Got little tiny squares called, anybody? Pixels. Thank you, Roche, or Chanel and Kentavious. So yes, so each one of these nails is equivalent to his pixels. So whenever we complain about, oh, I've got so many mouse clicks, you could be hammering all your pixels into something. So pixels, exactly. All right, so let's break rendering down now into CG. So in CG terms, we're basically taking our precious polygons that we modeled and we're converting them into pixels. So that whole process is what gives us our CG scenes. So we can break down rendering into three main components in CG: software rendering, hardware rendering, and vector rendering. So software rendering, let's kind of define software. Software implies that a program has to run in order for the display to happen. Now, little misconception maybe is that software needs hardware to run. And hardware needs software in order to display. So they both have a symbiotic relationship, but the difference is software is time-based, meaning we wait for something to happen. Hardware usually happens almost immediately. And then vectors are kind of, we're not really using polygons, we're using curves. So can anybody think of some software rendering apps that might fit that description, where something has to run in order for something to display? So while we're doing that, I'm going to take a quick drink. Anybody? All right, well, Maya, for one thing. Darian said game engines. Game engines, Darian, would be more like hardware, because most game engines are meant to display in what we call real time, meaning that we can get immediate results. So I'm going to put them down here with hardware. RenderMan definitely would be considered software. Maya actually has a renderer, Maya software. Arnold would be another one. Arnold is a renderer sitting as a plugin in Maya, allowing us to, render out our scenes. Anybody use Substance Painter? Yeah, Substance Painter. So in Substance Painter, you use iRay. If you want to render something out really nice, you send it and we use iRay. So you've got things like V-Ray, Chaos Group. All right, hardware rendering. Maya's got a hardware renderer. So game engines like Unity, Unreal, Maya hardware, Maya Viewport 2.0 is considered a hardware renderer. You guys model something in Maya, it shows up in the viewport, that's hardware. Now, vectors. So, anybody think of a program that uses vectors or curves as its primary display? I'll give you a hint. It's made by Adobe, at least one of the versions of it. Adobe Animate, possibly if you're rendering or animating vectors. Photoshop, not really, Marie. Photoshop can use paths, but not really curves. Yes. What was it? After Effects, sort of, you can use it to make things follow along on a path. That would be curved, but it doesn't really, that wouldn't be its primary display. Adobe Illustrator. Yes, thank you, Clifton. So Adobe Illustrator or Corel Draw, they are all vector-based, meaning you've got 2 points, and instead of connecting it with a straight line, you can connect it with a curve, sort of like in Maya, you've got a CV curve or an EP curve. But the thing about vectors is a lot of them use what are called Bezier curves. And a Bezier curve gives you the ability to create more organic shapes in your curve, like an S shape. And a Bezier curve gives you a set of handles on either end of the points that let you control where that portion of the curve goes. So very powerful. So let's take a look, see if we got any others here that we missed. You guys did a great job. Yep. Actually, Unity and Unreal both have the ability to do vectors. CAD, NURBS would be considered vectors, sort of. Darian, you could be right. I've always heard it, believe it or not, pronounced Bezier. But Bezier might be, okay, that might be correct. But I've always heard Bezier. I think if you say either one, somebody's going to understand what you're getting at. Yeah, I mean, I took one year of high school French, and from what I remember, the R, if you've got like an ER at the end of a word, is kind of like an A sound. The R, I think, is mostly silent, or it's pronounced more like an AY kind of sound. But of course, I could be wrong. But like I said, if you say it either way, I think somebody's going to know. If you say Bezier, I'm going to know, okay, Illustrator. All right, good job. Thank you for participating. So software rendering, that usually occurs on the CPU, right? Not restricted to the graphics card. Usually produces higher quality images because we have the ability to wait for it. Like I said, time-based. Generally more flexible. Why? Because of that time-based wait. But time-consuming. Whereas hardware generally occurs on a GPU, although modern graphics cards use the CPU, they use memory, any way they can steal it. Typically, they produce slightly lower quality images when compared to software, rapidly changing every couple of months. Okay, NVIDIA's got their 30 series, second or third generation ray tracing graphics cards that can do incredible things in real time. I just wish Apple would use them. Radeon is coming really close too. They've got, I think they're in their second generation of ray tracing cards. But it's really hard to get them squeezed into a laptop because they are kind of beastly and take up lots of heat. They are definitely going to be faster than software rendering. Usually have some kind of limitation with lights also. And by lights, I mean active lights. So back here on my wall, right now, I'm not interacting with that wall at all. So there's a shadow being cast from this kind of plastic board. Let me see if I can reposition that a little bit better. Okay, so right now you can see reflections of the ceiling lights in that wall. Okay, well, that's not interactive right now. That would be considered static. There's nothing happening there. Once you move somebody or a character in there, and now you've got a shadow on that wall, right? That shadow is now dynamic or interactive. So it's dynamic lights that are very expensive. We have to calculate the movement of the object. The shadows have to move depending on the kind of light that's hitting them. We have to account for how they look. So it can be pretty expensive. So a lot of times in a game, we'll bake lighting in for areas that do not need interactive shadow movement or light placement. Now, there's also some limited shadow support for things like point lights. So a point light is like a small point in space. Okay, but the thing about a point light is it's omnidirectional. It shines in all directions. If it shines in all directions, it's going to cast shadows in all directions. So a lot of times we can limit that point light to an axis or two. Just make it so that we only have shadows in the direction we want it. That will save render time. That will save calculation time. So a couple other things that you have to watch out for hardware: area lights. Area lights are what we consider to be our physical lights. They are basically big shapes of lights that if you scale them, make them bigger, they become softer. If you make them smaller, they become harder. They have harder edges to them. So that makes it a little harder to calculate in real time. So they are used very sparingly in real time. So a couple limitations, but really nothing is kind of a deal breaker. Now we get into vectors. You can do things like tune art, line art. You can do wireframe on shaded, which is really interesting. You can do just pure wireframe too. Now, when you're doing vectors, it's different than the viewport wireframe display that you get, which is all jagged and kind of nasty looking. So Maya has a vector renderer, and there are a couple of others out there, but Maya does a decent job. What it will do is at render time, using Maya materials only, it will take the wireframe, replace it with a vector, and give you a really beautiful, smooth wireframe. Now, it's good for modeling, not always good for, everyday use, but it is good for special visualizations. You can also have the ability to output in the old Adobe Flash, which, by the way, is no more. You can output as Illustrator. Encapsulated PostScript. Nobody uses encapsulated PostScript unless you're printing. But scalable vector graphics, those are the things you can scale up or shrink, and the resolution is totally independent of the actual, it's not like they're fixed pixels like a standard rasterized image is. All right, any questions so far? Anybody have any thoughts on hardware, software, vector? Clifton's good. Brianna's good. Jacer's good. Good, Frenzy? Okay. Okay, everybody good? Thank you. All right. So Maya versus Arnold. Maya's been around for a long time, since 1980s, mid to late 1980s. And actually, it came up from a program called Power Animator. It got bought by Alias, and then Wavefront came in and bought in to them, all through Silicon Graphics, which used to manufacture hardware, and they used, they kind of had this version of Unix called IRIX that the Maya ran on. It was interesting, very little interface to it. Eventually got ported with an interface. Really didn't have a great interface until they started porting it to the PC. And then like 3 or 4 years after that, when the Mac OS started using Unix, they were able to port it to the Mac OS. So it's come a long way, but it started off as what's called a scanline renderer. So if you don't know anything about scanline renderers, it does pixel by pixel, row by row, line by line. It does one pixel, does another pixel. It just goes straight across, goes down, and does another line. Now, that was the original rendering. Then came ray tracing, shooting rays out of a camera, shooting rays from a light, shooting rays from any surface, or not any surface, I should say, but any object that was tracking movement or tracking location. So it could be a camera, it could be a light. trying to figure out where the two are in relationship to each other. Okay, that gave us a lot more accuracy. It gave us much more accurate shadows, gave us the ability to do things like ray traced glass, where you get refractions when light passes through glass, when light passes through plastic or water, how things bend as they pass through. But that was really an add-on on top of the scan line. Now, the thing that Maya really did really well in the beginning was this thing called IPR, originally called interactive photorealistic rendering. It's basically keeps track of the pixels that change. You make a change, it redoes those pixels. Good tool. Trouble is, in the very early days, memory was quite limited, so you wound up crashing a lot, or your renders stopped updating after a while. Now, Arnold Renderer traces its roots back to around 1997, 96, 97, when the founder, Marcos Fajardo, had an idea about taking ray tracing and trying to implement it a little bit further than typical ray tracing. So it was a whole movement at the time for path tracing. In modern path tracing, there's a good video that Disney did, which, let me pull that up again. Where's that at? Right here. So if you go to this link, there's a very good Disney video kind of built in the, or not built, but kind of styled after the early 1940s Disney cartoons where they have an announcer. He's over enthusiastic, and they explain how ray tracing and path tracing work. Path tracing basically traces what the camera can see, and it's only concerned with what the camera can see. So if a ray hits an object inside the camera frame, it tracks it until it goes out. Once it goes out, chances are it's not coming back in. So it doesn't need to track it any further. So it's a little more accurate than tracing rays that are outside of the camera field of view and then bringing them back in. All right. The modern version of Arnold that we use today is a result of their collaboration with Sony ImageWorks in 2004. So roughly, 7 years between the inception of Arnold and Sony picking it up and using it, a lot was done. So it is the built-in interactive renderer in Maya. Autodesk bought Solid Angle, I guess about 5 years ago. There was another renderer that was bundled with Maya called Mental Ray, and that was bought by NVIDIA. And of course, NVIDIA bought it, stripped everything out, and then took all its good stuff and basically killed the product. So Maya decided, you know what, we need to buy a company rather than rely on a third party that could get bought up by somebody else. So they decided to go with Solid Angle. So it does have plugins for Maya, 3D Max, Houdini, Cinema 4D Katana. It uses something called, they call it Advanced Monte Carlo Ray Tracing Renderer. Monte Carlo simply means it is randomized points that are sampled in the scene. So the whole idea, one of the main differences between ray tracing and path tracing is ray tracing will sample a surface pixel once. It'll sample one pixel, right? Whereas path tracing will send hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of samples into the scene, and one pixel could get sampled multiple times from multiple places. So it tends to make it a little more a little more accurate because you are blanketing the entire scene. Whereas with ray tracing, you sample that one pixel could be next to another pixel, and they had this whole thing called adaptive rendering, where it would sample it again, and subsampling. Once you got into subsampling, you're really into path tracing. So early days of ray tracing, it's a lot simpler sampling algorithm. Modern path tracing ray tracers all use this Monte Carlo. It's basically a random pattern of samples in a scene, and it keeps randomly sampling every pass that it does. So a lot of times when you render, you'll see things, look really noisy, then it'll clean up a little bit, it'll clean up a little bit more, it'll clean up a little bit more. The whole idea is every time it goes through that, it is resampling the scene and getting more accurate results. Now, IPR, everybody's got it. V-Ray's got it, RenderMan's got it, Arnold's got it. Everybody uses IPR now. All right, so some of the advanced features that Maya only dreamed about, Maya really has no advanced features other than, hey, it's got ray tracing, right? Path tracing, global illumination, caustics, in quotes, and the ability to use what's called image-based lighting, which means we can use a high dynamic range image, use the information in that image as a light source and also environment color. So that gives us the ability. Now, Unreal, you can use actual HDR images for lighting as well. So HDR images are really kind of like, they are the image of choice when you want accurate color and intensity information, because all of that can be embedded into a high dynamic range image, whereas a JPEG, a PNG, a TIFF file, even a Targa can't have that much information in it. It's limited by the amount of information. All right, so whatever rendering package you're using, we're taking our precious 3D scene and we're basically translating it into a two-dimensional image or image sequence, right? Yeah, we've got stereo cameras, stereo glasses, we've got virtual reality, headsets, but in reality, those are still flat screens in front of your eyes with different timing and different kind of parallax view so that we get the illusion of depth, but it's not really a 3D viewing experience where you can walk around it. So in reality, we're still making things on a flat screen. And the purposes of rendering, we want to produce the highest quality image in the least amount of time to meet our production deadline. Now, our production deadline could be, 3 days, 3 minutes, 3 hours. It doesn't matter. It's whenever you're part of the puzzle. Because remember, if you're in a production, you are a piece in the puzzle pipeline, meaning everybody works together to make a product. Everybody has to have their piece of the puzzle done on time so it can be fit together. So your deadline is basically how much quality you can have. If you have absolutely no deadline at all, you can crank your settings up and wait, 36 hours for something to render. But if your deadline is, in an hour, well, guess what? You better get that out in under 20 minutes because you're going to have other things to do to get it there in that hour. But whatever your deadline is, we still need to be able to describe light and shadow and how it reacts to a surface. All right, does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? Frenzy's good. Clifton's good. All right, Brianna's good. Thank you. Kentavious is good. Awesome. All right. So got a couple of quick examples here. Scan line by line, row by row, renders very fast, but it does not give us the ability to get transparent shadows or reflections or colors in our shadows or colors. Well, since we don't have reflection, we can't get color and reflection. We don't have the ability to see light bend as it passes through a transparent surface. You can have a transparent surface, but you're not going to have refraction in it. So we have ray tracing. Ray tracing is better, right? We're sampling a pixel, a ray or a sample point hits a surface. Where that lands on a pixel, it traces it once it leaves that pixel. So we get the ability to have really nice, accurate, soft shadows, something we call it shadow attenuation. So the longer the shadow gets from the base, the softer it looks. And we'll get into that in lighting on Wednesday. Now, all of that is great. It does take more time to render, but totally worth it. And then we have path tracing, which sends out hundreds of thousands, millions of samples into the scene. We trace what the camera can see and really don't worry about anything else. So we can spend a lot more time inside the scene itself. So we get much more accuracy, right? Many rays sample a pixel rather than a single ray sampling a pixel. So we get more accurate reflections, refractions, transparent shadows, indirect light, which is really a big deal. Takes more time to render, but totally worth it. Now, file format for our class, we're going to be using what's called the OpenEXR half. Nice thing is, Arnold's got in the Arnold render view, it's got in the file, when you go to save it, it's there already. It gives you an EXR, and it really pretty simple to do. But that is the preferred format because it is mostly lossless, meaning it doesn't get compressed like a JPEG or a PNG. There are two variants. One is the half, which is 16 bits per channel, which is quite a bit of information. The other is 32 for medium-sized files like you're going to be doing for our class. Half is fine. And that's why half EXR, or I should say OpenEXR half, is what you get by default in most renderers. When you start getting into 4K, 8K images, yeah, you're probably going to need to use the OpenEXR float, the full 32-bit, but the halfers are good. Now, a standard RGB image is a 24-bit image. Oops, got to get my draw tool here. There we go. 24-bit image, meaning each channel has 8 bits of information. Okay, 8 bits is equal to roughly 256 levels of gray or variation from one color to another. From, let's say, levels of gray from absolute white to absolute black. From 0 being black to 256 being fully white. Or sometimes it's 0 to 1, depending on your calculation system. So 8 times 3. So you got 8 red, 8 green, 8 blue. Oops. That comes out to be 24 bits. 8 times 3 is 24. Standard image. This gives us 16.5 million colors. That's why it is kind of an industry standard, 24-bit images, RGB information, red, green, blue. 16.5 million colors is roughly a continuous tone photograph that we're used to seeing. That's what our human eye sees pretty well. So they're filtered together. The way they're filtered together gives us that RGB look. Now, image size is always going to be in pixels. We talk about pixels all the time. Okay, so we always use width first and then height. So when you're giving somebody the resolution of an image, it's always width by height. So for example, we've recently last 10, 15 years, we've started using abbreviations like 2K, which is 2048 by 2048, or HD. HD is an aspect ratio, but it could be HD 720, which is 1280 by 720, 1280 wide, 720 high. You get to Blu-ray, sometimes called HD 1080. Okay, that's 1920 wide, 1080 high. You get into 4K, that's 4096 by 20 something. I forget what it is. But it's always that aspect ratio wider than it is taller. So resolution, how many pixels can we squeeze into an area? The more pixels we squeeze into an area, the more definition, the more information we can have, the better our profile, our curve, our basically how smooth does the object look. So give you an idea of some early resolution. Most of you probably have no idea what I'm saying when I say, analog television. Like analog television, I grew up in an era where you had rabbit ears or a big antenna sticking on top of the house, and your TV was curved, and you could rub your hand on it, and you could feel the radiation. It's like, okay, that was 640 by 480. Now you could buy bigger TVs, but that's pretty much the pixels you had. Standard analog over-the-air waves. Then around mid-1990s, like 1995, we shifted from analog signals to digital signals. We broke everything into zeros and ones. We were able to broadcast it in a narrower bandwidth, so we got a little more resolution. We jumped up to 720 by 486, which was DVD size when it first started. That was DVD resolution. Then we started to get the HD wars in 2000. HD 720 or 1280 by 720. That did not last long. That lasted maybe a year. And then we got into Blu-ray or HD 1080. Now it's 4K. You can't even get a 2K TV anymore. An HD TV, everything's HD for 4K HD, or now 8K. Ridiculous. Give you an idea of what's going on. original motion picture film, the size of the, they call it a plate, but the size of the frame was actually, when scanned in or when measured, it was actually a 2K frame. It was 2048 by 1556. So we've come quite a long way. Our pixels have gotten smaller. We've gotten more definition into a smaller area. So consequently, we have much better graphics than we ever had. And everything is broken into pixels. So pixels are great, but pixels are like Lego blocks, right? You have little tiny squares. They're really good for going in straight lines and right angles. But when you have a curve or a diagonal, then, it looks like a stair. So in order to kind of minimize that, over the years, graphics algorithms have added in something called anti-aliasing, which is basically just taking an interpolation or an approximation between the two edges. You've got this dark edge and a light edge. And if you put some shades of gray in there, it gives you the ability to make it look smoother when you either start to squint or you look further away from it. So anti-aliasing, very important feature. I would say most, if not all, renderers have it built in. Now, when we get into doing it in Unreal, we're going to be adding it into our settings to make sure that we get a good result when we do a batch render out of Unreal for our animation for Project 4. But, everything else, all renderers like Arnold and V-Ray and RenderMan, they all have this built in. Plus, they do what are called super sampling pixels. That means instead of sampling a pixel once, like traditional ray tracing, it will basically sample a pixel. Let me zoom in here to extreme pixel size, right? So what it will do is it will sample a pixel in multiple locations. So it might sample a pixel here and here and over here and over here. And, eventually each time it's going to sample in a different place. All trying to figure out what's around it. Okay, so we've got this dark pixel here that's being sampled also. We got this area up top here, this area over here. So we're not just concerned with where this pixel sits in an image, we're concerned with all the different locations that the sample points hit to define what we see. And since we can do that, we got a lot more detail. And that's why modern renderers tend to look grainy at first. It looks like there's noise or sand all over the image. That's because we're basically, instead of chipping away at stones, we're using fine-grained sand to be able to create the image. So it's going to look smoother but noisier, and it's getting rid of that noise. That's the real key to producing a production quality render. Most renderers can give you a pretty good anti-aliased image, which means the edges usually look pretty smooth. They can really kind of interpolate what's going on if you come over here. So you can interpolate a lot better. But at the cost of interpolation, we want it to look, we not only have light areas and dark areas, but we also have what are called indirect light areas, which is where direct light does not get to. So for example, under your desk, since you're sitting there, Frenzy, you've got a shadowy area under your desk. Okay, and you people at home too. So under your desk, under your chair, that's where direct light does not get, right? That's going to be a darker area. Those areas are the hardest to get to look, for want of a better word, clean when we render them. because light does not hit the surface directly. It hits off another surface, it bounces to another surface, bounces again, and then it finally gets underneath the table. So all of that takes a lot more time to converge or clean up. And that's where we spend most of our time when you go to render an image. Because when light hits a surface directly, that's easy to calculate. It's when it's bounce light or indirect light, that's going to be like the real test of a renderer. And that's what we're pretty much going to be focusing on today. Because most renderers, you hit the render button, it gives you a decent render. But it's knowing how to get that bounce light or indirect light clean that's going to make your render look better than somebody else's. All right. Any questions so far? Ambient occlusion, right? Caustics is sprinkled in there somewhere. Ambient occlusion is basically, it is how, it has nothing to do with light. Ambient occlusion is basically, does one object occlude or block another? Well, a lot of people think that has to do with lighting, but your lighting determines where it's bright and consequently where the shadow is. With ambient occlusion, so I got my phone here and I put my pen here. So right now, I don't know if you can see it. So there's like a little kind of shadowy reflection area going straight down, sort of there, right around there. All right, so what's going on there is my pen is basically blocking a ray from being able to see this object directly. So it has to do, let me see if I can draw this for you. All right, so we have a plane right here, and I'm just going to draw an ugly circle. So we got a plane, and that's too ugly. Let's do this. So we have a circle. We've got a plane under it. So ambient occlusion works by trying to figure out if a ray is shot off of the plane and goes up and doesn't hit the sphere, it's not occluded or blocked. Okay, so this one might hit here, causing it to be blocked there. This ray might hit right here, and so on. As it gets closer to the point of contact, it gets darker and darker. So basically, the information you get is black and white. Anything that's white is not occluded. Anything that's black is totally blocked. Anything that's gray is somewhere in between. But that really has nothing to do with lighting. That's really just calculating where, for want of a better expression, like contact shadows are. So if you put your hand down on a table, right, you'll notice that there is underneath your hand, there is a super dark shadow. And there's probably a lighter shadow, even with your hand. So keep your hand on the table. Take a look underneath of the main shadow. There's a darker shadow where your hand makes contact with the table. So that would be the occluded part. And that would be what ambient occlusion is mostly used for. Does that kind of make sense, Darian? Like ambient occlusion is a lot different than path tracing, because in path tracing, we are basically trying to figure out what the camera sees and where the light is in relationship to that camera. All right, so let me see. So here's our sphere. Here's a light over here. And here's our camera. We'll draw a typical Maya camera. Well, let's actually draw something a little better. So we'll use the old camera take-up reel for the camera. So the camera is looking at the object here. Camera can also see a bunch of other stuff. Field of view for the camera. Also, in the meanwhile, our light is throwing out light rays. And what's happening is, so our light ray would hit here, and it might bounce up here. It hits here, it might bounce down here. This one hits here, it might actually hit where the camera is. So the top of the sphere might have direct light on it, or close to direct light where the camera sees it. Okay, now if this light shoots up, this straight arrow going up here, if that goes up out of frame, the camera doesn't care about it. But if it hits an object, let's say we have an object up here. I have an object up here. So if it hits that and then bounces down and then bounces over, then our camera can see it, but it had to bounce a couple of times in order for our camera to see it. So that's path tracing. Occlusion is just worried about how far one surface is from another surface and providing that information for, like in Substance, you use it for height information for, say, you've got rust on an object and you want the rust to be more prominent at the lower part of the object where it's closer to the ground or closer to water or something. And the higher up it goes, it might be a little less rusty. So that's why we would use things like ambient occlusion for basically being able to figure out how high up, not noise, well, technically it is noise, but how high up that information, that rust needs to go on the object. And that's where things like ambient occlusion would be used. But in the old days, ambient occlusion was used for contact shadows. Some renderers, they would do a separate pass for it. That's before we got into ray tracing and actual path tracing, where we actually got good, solid contact shadows. Games use it all the time because it's a cheap way to get really good contact shadows and not spend a lot of time calculating it. All right, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. Kind of a little impromptu talk about that. That's actually a very good question. I haven't seen ambient occlusion mentioned in a long time. Used to be one of my favorite topics when it was really hard to get good contact shadows before the days of global illumination. Kind of global illumination did away with the need for that ambient occlusion because now we're tracking light all around the scene, even indirect light. And ambient occlusion in the early days of rendering was used to kind of make up for that lack of global illumination, indirect light that we get. All right, good job, everybody. This is a good time for us to take a short break. What we'll do is, I like to take a short break because it gives me a chance to stop the Zoom recording, give my computer a chance to clear out. I can upload it to YouTube and get back to everybody in 20 minutes. All right, so before we go on break, does anybody have any questions? When we come back, we're going to do demos and talk about what we're going to work on today. Brianne is good. Thank you. Clifton's good. Frenzy, you good? Frenzy's good. Everybody good? All right. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.